Chapter 2. The Adventures of the First Dervish. Know, my friends, that the place of my birth was the land of the Yemen, and my father was a wealthy merchant called Khaja Ahmed. At the time of which I tell, no banker or other merchant was as rich as he. He had established factories and agents in most countries, and the value of his merchandise was very great. There were two of us children, I and my sister, who married a merchant's son in another city when she was old enough. I received a good education and was taught reading and writing by the best of tutors. I also learned the keeping of accounts, a most important part of a merchant's education, and the science and practice of the military arts. Up to the age of 14, I passed my time very happily. No cares of the world ever touched me. Then, all at once, by the decree of Allah, my father and mother both died in the same year. I cannot express my grief at that time. There was no elder of the family left to watch over me. I passed 40 days and nights in a state of the utmost sadness. My relations and strangers, who had been my parents' friends, came and assembled to perform the rites of mourning. After the 40 days were gone, they placed on my head the turban of my late father and said, "In this world, the parents of all of us must die. Have patience, and look after your establishment. You now have taken your father's place. Be careful in all your affairs and transactions." Then, after saluting me in a kindly fashion, they left me alone to carry on as my father had done. Then there came to me all my employees, agents and factors, and bowed before me. They showed me around the warehouses and displayed the money in the coffers. I was amazed at all this tremendous wealth, and my imagination soared. I gave orders for a reception hall to be prepared for me, with a room furnished with bolsters, fine carpets and curtains and fine bamboo screens. I took handsome retainers into my service and had them dressed in the most sumptuous of liveries. But no sooner was I in my father's position in the business than I was surrounded by a large number of liars and flatterers, fops and parasites. They diverted me with tales of intrigue and gossip from everywhere, telling me that while I was young I should drink the best of wines, eat of the finest foods, and enjoy the company of the most beautiful girls in the land. This I did to the very best of my ability. Drinking and dicing occupied much of my time. At last, because of my immaturity, forgetting my commercial concerns, I became the victim of my behaviour. My servants helped themselves to everything they could lay hands on. My fair-weather companions debauched me all the time. Systematic plunder took place around me. There was no one to safeguard my property, no one to advise or warn me. No account was kept of the money which was squandered, lent, or invested in unworthy schemes. No entries were in the books as to where it came from or where it went. It was a case of easy come, easy go. Had I possessed even the treasures of Midas, they would not have lasted me long, the way things were going. In a few short years all my money was lost. It had disappeared like snow upon the face of the desert. Soon I had only a few rags about my body, instead of the fine clothes I had become accustomed to wearing, and a plain skull cap, such as servant boys have, was the only protection for my head. Those who had shared feasts and gambling parties for so long at my home disappeared too. Even if I met them by chance in the street, in my wretched and penniless condition, they would turn away and cross to the other side to avoid me. I apparently filled them with disgust. These were the blood brothers who had so often sown their wild oats with me, and had sworn many a time to shed the last drop of their blood for me, should it have been necessary. My servants went to work for others who could tempt them with greater gain. My house stood empty and untended, my cupboards bare. My treasures of great price were stolen by those whom I had trusted most. No one remained to ask, "How can we help you in the distressing condition into which you have fallen? Are you hungry, thirsty, alone?" I had no companions except my regrets. Faint with hunger, I at last made up my mind to go and beg from my sister Fatima. She, surely, I reasoned, would not let me die like this. I then realised that I had not replied to any of her letters of kindness, even her messages of condolence at our father's death. I had not even bothered to inquire about her health for years. How could I possibly go to her now in this state? I would bring shame upon our name in her husband's eyes, I knew. But such was my need that I went to her house, begging my way, until at last I arrived there. My sister wept when she heard of my troubles. She embraced me and blessed me with deep feeling. She distributed coins and oil to the poor in thankfulness at my safe arrival at her home, and gave me beautiful new clothes. I, having bathed and rested, put on these garments and felt a new man. Fatima provided me with a most elegant apartment near her own and lavished every attention upon me. A servant brought me cooling sherbets to quench my thirst in the forenoon, fresh and dried fruit for my luncheon, and at dinner meat kebabs, rich palaus, and bread of the most delicious flavour. Fatima waited upon me with her own hands as well, and with great care nursed me back to health after my starvation. I offered thanks to God for my deliverance, and several months passed in this new tranquillity. One day my sister said to me, "My dear brother, you are now fully restored to your former strength. I am very happy to see this, and to know that you are better. But man was not created to be idle. I do not want people to say that you, having spent all your wealth, are now living on scraps from your brother-in-law's table." I replied that she was right, and that I would do anything that she advised. Having received my consent, she then went out and brought in, with the assistance of her servants, a large number of gold pieces and laid them before me. "A merchant is just on the point of setting out with a ship to Damascus. With this money, buy some merchandise and send it, and proceed there with him. When you arrive, sell the goods to some buyer, or sell them yourself in the bazaar, whichever may be most convenient." Thanking her, I went to the warehouses and brought a vast quantity of fine goods. The merchant, who had been known to Fatima as an honest fellow, set off by sea, and I prepared to follow him by land. When I said goodbye to my affectionate sister, she gave me a rich robe and a superb Arab horse with jewelled harness. She put some sweetmeats in a leather bag and hung it on the pommel of my saddle, and she handed me a flask of water. Then Fatima tied a talisman on my arm and put me under the protection of God on my journey. "Come back safely," she said as I mounted. "God be your protector also," I answered, and we parted. After a long journey, I at last arrived safely at the main gate of Damascus. The doorkeeper, however, would not open the gate to me, as I had arrived very late at night. "I am a lone traveller," I called through the grille. "I have come a long journey at great speed. Both I and my horse are in need of rest and food. Kindly open the gate, and I will no doubt be able to get hospitality in the city somewhere," in which the rude reply from within was, "There is no permission given to me to open the gate at this hour of the night. You should not have arrived so late. We cannot admit you until dawn." With that, the grille was slammed shut. There was nothing for it but to remain outside. I wrapped myself in a blanket and sat against the city wall beside my tired Arab horse. In the middle of the night, when I could not sleep for anxiety, I saw descending from the wall of the fortress a chest. Thinking that someone had had pity on my situation and sent me some food, when the chest rested on the ground, I opened it. I saw within a lovely woman of elegant appearance, wounded and weltering in her own blood in agonies of pain. Such a beautiful creature in this plight would move a man, even if his heart were made of stone. By degrees, as I watched, horrified, her lips moved, and I could just hear her words. "Faithless wretch! Wicked tyrant! Is this how you repay all I have done for you? Well, give me one more blow and let me die. I leave to God your punishment for this injustice." Gazing upon her face and hearing her words, I wondered what sort of savage would seek to harm such as she. What demon possessed him that he could raise his hand against her. Then she opened her eyes and looked at me. The moment her gaze met mine, my heart throbbed with excitement. I had never seen such beautiful eyes. I said with some difficulty, "Lady, who are you? And what sad affair is this?" She slowly and faintly answered, "I am your guest, for a few more moments only. My spirit is about to depart this world. When I am dead, bury me in some quiet place in this chest. Then I shall be free from the tongues of good and bad, and you will earn for yourself a future reward." Her eyes closed, and she was silent. In the night, or what remained of it, I sat beside the chest and said my prayers. I determined that in the morning I would go into the city and do all in my power for the cure of this beautiful woman. The cock crowed, the sun rose, and the voices of men were heard. I enclosed the chest in a coarse piece of sacking, put it on my horse's back, and entered the city. I began to inquire of every man and shopkeeper where I might rent a house. After much searching, I at last found one suitable. The first thing I did was to take the beautiful woman out of the chest and lay her, fully clothed as she was, on a soft bed made up of quilts of cotton. I then placed a servant to watch over her and went in search of a surgeon. Someone told me, "Such and such a place is a certain barber who is so skilled in the art of surgery and the science of physic that if you carry a dead person to him, by the help of God, he will revive him. He is known by the name of Isa." After several further inquiries, I found him. He had a long white beard and was sitting under the portico of his door. Several assistants were busy grinding powders in mortars for him. I made him a respectful salute and said, "Having heard of your excellent qualities, sir, I have come to request your help. I set out from my country, my wife with me, because of my great affection for her, and arrived near this city late last night. In the middle of the night, while waiting for the gates to open at dawn, we were attacked by robbers. They plundered me of my valuables and wounded my wife, tearing her jewellery from her arms and neck. I could not protect her and came into the city this morning as soon as I could. I have taken a house here, and leaving her, have come to you with all speed. I beg you, please come and see my wife, and I will be grateful to you for the rest of my life." Immediately Isa the surgeon came with me and examined the lady, who lay still as if dead. He cleaned her wounds and stitched those which needed it. He dressed them with bandages which he had brought with him, and gave me hope that she would survive. "In 40 days, he continued, "the patient's wounds will be cured. Continue to give her this spirit of bed musk in rose water, and chicken broth in small quantities. I will come morning and evening." I thanked him fervently, and he left. Night and morning I attended the beautiful lady, and daily I prayed for her cure. In time the merchant who had been entrusted with my goods arrived in Damascus and delivered them to me. I sold them as occasion demanded and began to spend the money on medicines and remedies. The surgeon was regular in his attendance, and in short time all the wounds began to heal. Soon the lady was almost restored to health. I laid a rich purse of gold before Isa the surgeon, and spread beautiful carpets and embroidered cloths before the lady. I distributed large sums of money to the poor and needy in thanksgiving, and was as happy as if I had become the king of the 7 climes. On the beautiful lady's cure, her cheeks began to show the colour of the rose, and her face shone with health. I could not look at her without being dazzled. My heart was completely hers. I devoted myself entirely to her service, but, if ever, in the consciousness of her high rank, she allowed herself to look my way, it was to say things like, "Whatever I order, perform without objection. Take care, too, that you never utter a syllable to anyone about my affairs. Otherwise, you will regret it." So I did nothing without her consent, and provided her with a home and servants galore. I asked nothing but to look upon her beauty. A certain amount of time passed. I had spent everything I had obtained from my goods. At last I was distressed for money, and feared that in a foreign country, where I was unknown, I could not borrow. To whom could I speak of these difficulties? Daily I grew more pale and anxious. One day, The beautiful lady said to me, "That which you have done for me, I greatly appreciate, but at the moment I cannot make recompense. If there is anything needed for necessary expenses, however, do not worry, but bring me paper, pen, and ink." I was convinced that this lady must be a princess, otherwise she would not talk with such boldness and hauteur. I instantly brought her writing materials, and she wrote a note in a fine hand. "There are 3 arched gates near the fort. In the adjoining street lives one Sidi Bahar. Go and deliver this note to him." I went according to her orders, and soon found the house. By the porter I sent word that I had brought a letter. A handsome young negro came out to me and took the note from my hand. He said nothing and entered the house. In a short time he came out again, accompanied by a number of slaves who carried 11 sealed trays covered with brocade. "Go with this young man," he told the slaves, "and deliver these trays." I saluted the negro in farewell and took the slaves to my house. The trays were carried in and the slaves dismissed. The lady removed the covers from the trays and placed 11 bags of gold before me, saying, "Take these coins for expenses. God is most bountiful." What strange circumstances are these, I said to myself. God is bountiful indeed. I could not ask the lady anything about the why and wherefore of this money, as to how, on the delivery of a single slip of paper, such vast treasure could be made available to me. 8 days after this, the lady said to me, "Though tattered clothes are no disparagement of your manhood, yet in public he who is shabby has no respect paid to him. So take these 2 bags of gold, and go to the shop of Yusuf the merchant, and buy some rich suits of clothes and jewels of high value, and bring them here." I instantly mounted my horse and went to the shop described. I saw there a handsome young man, clothed in a saffron-coloured robe, seated on a cushion. I saluted him, and having sat down, mentioned the articles required. The young merchant replied with great politeness, "Whatever you need is here for you. But tell me, from what country do you come, and what are the motives of your stay in this city of Damascus?" I did not want to tell him all my business, so I made up some brief story and took the clothes and jewels and paid for them. I was just about to go when the young man, who seemed displeased, said, "Sir, among well-bred people it is not customary to show such coldness as yours, even if they wish to be reserved about their private affairs." He appeared so upset at my over-hasty departure that I did not think it courteous to leave so hurriedly, so I sat down again and said, "Command me, I will fulfill your demands." He was pleased with my compliance, and smiling, said, "If you will honour my poor house with your company today, then we can have some hours of good cheer and hilarity together." I had never left the beautiful lady alone for long since I had arrived in the city, and thinking of her solitude, I began to make excuses. But the young man would not allow me to leave without promising to come back after I had taken my things home. I carried everything back to my fair lady and told her all. I asked her permission to go to the evening's entertainment. She said, "You have made a promise. Leave me under the protection of God, and accept the offer of hospitality." I said, "My heart does not wish to leave you, but I will obey your orders and go. Until I return, my heart is attached to this very spot." Saying this, I went to the handsome merchant's shop. He, seated on an ebony chair, was anxiously awaiting me. "Come along, sir," he said. "You have kept me too long." He arose and conducted me to a garden, which was very beautiful. There were fountains playing in basins and canals. Fruits of every kind were growing here and there, and birds of many species were singing on the boughs. Elegant Persian silk carpets were spread out in the great pavilion, which was in the centre of the garden. Soon my host excused himself for a few moments and came back dressed in the most sumptuous robes. "May the evil eye be averted," I cried superstitiously. He smiled and said, "You too must be suitably dressed," and slaves took me to another room, giving me an even richer attire than the host's. Our conversation was elegant in every way. The entertainment and food were the finest I had ever seen, and he was warm in his expressions of friendship to me. A cup-bearer appeared with a flask of wine and a crystal cup. The salt cellars were passed around, and yet more delicious food was brought to me. The sparkling cup began to circulate again, and 4 dancing boys with loose, flowing robes came in and began to sing and play. In the midst of this festivity, the young merchant's eyes began to fill with tears. and to my distress they trickled thick and fast down his cheeks. "Now, between us a friendship for life is formed," he said, turning to me. "I am going to impart a secret to you, in the confidence of friendship, if you will give me leave. I will now send for my dear mistress, for without her I cannot enjoy any pleasure." I replied, "Why send for her without delay? For your happiness is mine." The young merchant made a sign, and soon through the door curtain came in an old, wizened woman, as ugly as an ogress, whom one might die upon seeing for the first time. I was frightened at the sight of her, but she sat down beside my friend, and I said to myself, "How can this she-demon be so loved and praised so highly by this handsome young man?" I muttered a form of exorcism and became silent. The witch laughed immodestly and showed all her teeth. My host was in transports of delight. The festive scene of wine and music continued for 3 days and 3 nights. On the 4th day, I fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. Next morning, the young merchant awakened me with a cup of some cool liquid. He said to his aged mistress, "To trouble our guest any longer would be improper. He may depart." I thanked him profusely and put on my own clothes. I was distressed at having left the angelic lady in my house for so long alone. I was most ashamed of myself for having been away for 3 days and nights, and when I reached the house, made her many apologies. She smiled and said, "I well know the ways of the world, but what does it matter if you had to stay to oblige your friend? But now I think it proper that you, having tasted of his hospitality, should invite this young merchant in return for a feast here. You should give him twice as much as he gave you, and you may rely upon me to provide the necessary things." Then I went to the jeweller and invited him, and he most happily accepted. I returned home, and was surprised to see a great bustle all around it. The street had been swept and watered. Silver mace carriers and club bearers were in attendance at the door. Rich carpets and tapestries were laid out in all the rooms, and embroidered bolsters for guests to recline upon were ready in the reception salon. In the niches of the walls, oranges and rare confectionery were placed. Lamps in the shape of cypresses and lotuses were lit. Scented candles were burning in golden candlesticks, and every attendant was at his post. In the kitchen the pots were jingling, jars of ice were ready for the fruit juice sherbets, and a most delicious smell floated everywhere. Everything was ready for a princely feast. Dancing boys and girls, singers, musicians and clowns in bright rich clothes were waiting and singing together. I led the merchant in, and he was quite amazed. So indeed was I. I thought how wonderful it was that in so short a time everything was thus arranged. I could nowhere see a trace of the beautiful lady, but at last found her in the kitchen in plain clothes and with no jewels, giving directions for the feast. I approached her and gave her my thanks for such a wonderful feast, invoking blessings upon her. But she was displeased at my words and said, "What have I done that you are so astonished? Enough, I dislike such talk. What sort of manners have you, to be talking here while you neglect your guest? Return to him, and send for his mistress, and let her sit beside him." I at once went back to my guest and showed him every courtesy. 2 slaves came in with wine and cups, and we drank. I said, "Please send a message to your mistress, so that she may be here to enjoy the evening beside you." He was extremely pleased, and I sent a eunuch to bring her. She arrived in a beautiful sedan chair, but my mind was shut towards her, so evil was her appearance. Though she was dressed in the finest brocades, her eyes were small and red-rimmed, and she had a very obvious beard on her chin. Her withered neck was hung with jewels, and she had rings on every finger. In her ears were emeralds of great price. I went to receive her with apparent kindness, but I was horribly repulsed by her appearance. The young man, on seeing her, was overcome with delight, and the hag hung around the neck of that handsome merchant. The eyes of all were turned in their direction, and each guest said to his neighbour, "Of course, you must see Layla with the eyes of poor mad Majnun." And everyone agreed with that. Amid scenes of great festivity, 3 days and 3 nights passed away. On the 4th night, the young merchant said to me, I must now ask your permission to leave, as I have, for your friendship, utterly neglected my affairs. Please sit beside me for a short while, and I will be so happy." Then the wine cup was passed around with such rapidity that I soon became senseless. When the morning came, I woke with a terrible headache, and was amazed to find that none of the beauty of the nights before remained. All the food, the silver, the servants, the furniture were gone. The house was empty, except for a large bundle in a corner of the hall. I went to it in my half-stupefied state and pulled aside some of the material. I saw, to my horror, the body of my friend the merchant, and that of the ugly old woman, his mistress, still decked in all her finery and jewels. I was in such a state of shock that I staggered to the door, and there I saw a servant, and asked him what in the name of God had happened. He replied briefly, "What good will it do to hear an explanation?" I realized that what he said was true, and then I said to him, "In what house is the beloved lady?" "Whatever I know I will tell you," he said cryptically, "but I am surprised that you should, without her ladyship's permission, have indulged in such heavy drinking." I was very ashamed of my own folly, and begged the man to give me the lady's address, and that quickly. The fellow, becoming more friendly, told me the address, and went off to bury the two bodies. After finding it, I waited outside the lady's house that whole day and night, in an agony of suspense, and at last, in the light of the dawn, she put her head out of the window. I felt such joy and praised the goodness of God. Soon a servant of hers came to me and said, "Go and stay in the adjoining mosque, and perhaps you may attain the wish of your heart." I waited in the mosque for a long time, and watched the door with great anticipation all day. Towards evening, the same servant who had given me the directions to find the lady's house entered. He took me with him, and made me sit down in a small garden. He said, "Stay here until your desire is accomplished." I passed the time admiring the flowers, and the brightness of the full moon, and the play of the fountains in the moonlight. After a little while, when I was comparing her in my mind to the roses and the moon, my beautiful lady came into the garden, wearing a rich dress embroidered with pearls, and covered from head to foot with an embroidered veil of blue silk. She sat down on a seat, and I ran to her, offered my life to her, and stood like a slave before her with folded arms. The servant who was her steward also appeared, pleading my cause to her, and asking her for mercy for me. I said, "I am guilty, and whatever the punishment, I will accept it." The lady, undoubtedly displeased, said with hauteur, "The best thing that can be done for him now is that he be given a bag of 100 pieces of gold, and having got his affairs in order, should return to his own country." She did not even look my way. On hearing these words, I became like a block of wood. All the world turned dark to me. "If I had had desire for worldly wealth," I said, "would I have thus devoted my life to you and to your commands? Are the acknowledgments due to my services nothing whatsoever to you, and that you have shown me such disfavour? To me life is of no further use. To the lover there is no recourse against the faithlessness of the loved one." "What?" she cried. "Are you my lover? Oh, fool! Little mouths should not utter such big words. Be silent. If anyone else had spoken such nonsense, I would have ordered that his body be cut into pieces. But what can I do? Your services come to my recollection. You had best take the road home now." I said I would never attain the desire of my heart, but be fated to wander miserably through woods and over mountains until I were dead. Upon my finishing, she said, "These hints and this flattering nonsense are not agreeable to me. Go and repeat them to those who are the ones to hear them." Then, getting up, she returned to the house. I beseeched her to hear me, but there was no reply, and so I went away, sad and hopeless. For 40 days I paced the lanes of the city. Then I went to the nearby woods. When I became restless there, I returned to the city. I thought not of nourishment during the day, nor sleep at night. I became like a lunatic. Not the least strength remained in my body. Becoming feeble, I went and lay down by the wall of the same mosque. One day the lady's steward came to say his prayers and passed near me. I was repeating these lines: "Give me the strength of mind to bear these pangs of the heart, or give me death." Though I was much altered, the steward knew me and said in a kindly manner, "What a state is this to which you have brought yourself?" Then the man went in and said his prayers, and when he came out he put me in a sedan and got 2 slaves to carry me to the house of that indifferent lady. Although I was greatly changed, she must have recognized me, but she pretended not to, and asked the man who I was. He answered that I was that unfortunate man that lived only for her. However I tried to forget her, my life became less and less endurable. She said in jest that this could not be me, for had she not received word from her agents that I had long ago arrived back in my own land? The man insisted that it was indeed me, and then she ordered that I be nursed back to health, after which she said she would make further inquiries about me. We both asked her most earnestly to give me some further sign of her kindness, and she called the physicians. Their diagnosis, after much investigation, was that I was in love, and that only upon being reunited with my loved one would I be cured. So she ordered me to be bathed and dressed afresh, and when I was again brought before her, she asked me to speak whatever was in my heart. O Dervishes, I was so excited that my robe could hardly contain me. I said, "I obey your command. Allow me to remain with you. Raise me up." So she ordered that the magistrate be brought, and we were married. I now felt that all my troubles were lifted, but there was another perplexity in my mind. I realized I must know the mysteries behind the events of which I had formed a part. The marriage was not consummated because of this desire. The following morning she remarked that I was indeed an odd individual, and asked me what I desired. I explained that I was uneasy, not being able to understand any single thing which had happened to me during my association with her. She answered that she had already told me that I was not to pry into her affairs. When I pressed the point, she suggested that to know her secret might become a cause of great trouble, but I was not to be persuaded, and in the end she agreed to explain.